All right, lesson 12 is going to provide you with an editing example. So I'm going to be going through and showing you exactly how I think about editing podcasts, what camera angle I start with, who I switch to, how often do I switch. All of this is going to be covered in this lesson. I'm going to edit about the first 60 seconds, and you'll be able to watch kind of me progress, and I share all of my thought process with you. So hopefully you enjoy this one. You can see that I've hidden the top 3 layers, right? Because I know, and what we're seeing is the bottom layer. Okay, so what we want to do is get really familiar with which layers are which. So this top layer is Jeff, is one of the co-hosts. If we hide Jeff and we unhide that second to top layer, we have Cece. All right, Cece, co-founder and owner of Red Dot Fitness and Scott's partner. And if we hide that layer, we have, Scott, the host, okay? And if we hide Scott, who's this third layer down from the top, we have our main camera angle. So if we unhide everything, essentially, this right here, this space above, is the audience. Okay, so you can just imagine the audience is looking down at this podcast. All right, this is Instagram looking in, YouTube, everything, all these different social media platforms, whatever. So if we remove Jeff from the audience at this point, now the audience is going to be seeing Cece. If we remove Cece, now the audience is going to be seeing Scott. If we remove Scott, now the audience here that's looking in is going to be seeing camera angle, the wide camera angle. So it's our job to tell the coolest story without having, all these crazy, ridiculous cuts where it's distracting. It's kind of like, who's behind this? Who's editing this? What we want to do is we want to read people's minds in terms of who they would be looking at if they were in the room. So if they were looking in and they walked in for the first time, well, they would want to be looking at everybody, right? They'd immediately want to check out everybody as quickly as they could. So we want to start with this wide camera angle. Then, let's say the host starts talking for a long period of time, they'd probably just pay attention to the host. So then we want to cut to the host. If somebody laughs out of the blue or has a weird, crazy facial expression, well, we'd want to shift focus and attention to them. Okay. And there's also this rule of about 10 seconds. You don't want to keep, during an interview, you don't want to keep the camera angle static on someone for 10 seconds. And that's why we use I and O. So as you can see, we've set our beginning point, or we can click I, and we can drag that wherever we want. And by pressing O, you'll see that we have a timestamp set up, okay? So as we listen, I'm going to be pressing O, and what I want you to do is pay attention to this timestamp here.
About power training, what it is, when to do it, when not to do it, who should be doing it, who shouldn't be doing it, and then maybe how to apply it. So
as you can see there, at 9 seconds, okay, we might want to make a cut. And since, our host is introing the show, we're probably going to want to cut to him next. All right. And then we can just take these top layers and keep moving them down. All right. And that's why we want to have the people that talk the least on the top layers, and the people that are talking the most, or the camera angles that are working for the most amount of time, on the bottom. Making sense now, right? So let's go ahead and watch this first cut, and things will speed up as we go, but it's just important to take things slow at first.
Today we're talking about power training, what it is, when to do it, when not to do it, who should be doing it, who shouldn't be doing it, and then maybe how to apply it. So when we talk about power training, I think it's important that we define kind of what it is, because I think there's a lot of misconception out there. It isn't complicated.
So as you can see here, he's saying a lot of misconception, and he's looking straight at, this co-host. So we could cut to him, and he's probably having an interesting facial expression. You can kind of see Scott here in the corner. So let's go ahead and watch that.
because I think there's a lot of misconception out there. It isn't complicated, but it is somewhat complex, and I think it's important.
All right, so as you can see, that cut worked pretty well, right? So he looks directly at him, and he's nodding his head, right? So anytime there's interaction or there's head nodding or there's kind of agreement or disagreement, it's kind of cool to capture that and include that, all right? So as you can see, we are 18 seconds in, okay, and we've made 3 edits, which kind of lines up. We don't want to go more than 10, seconds without an edit. So if we are 18 seconds in and we haven't cut to one of the camera angles yet, consider, finding which camera angle you want to cut to. And then after I get that reaction, we're cutting back to this wide camera angle 1. And as you can see, again, we talked about the audience, right? The audience is looking in. So the audience is looking in from this way, boom. When the clip gets about here, they're seeing a different story, right? They're seeing a different angle.
So when we talk about power training, I think it's important that we define kind of what it is, because I think there's a lot of misconception out there. It isn't complicated.
All right, we can pull this back just a little bit there. It isn't complicated.
But it is somewhat complex, and I think it's important that we maybe break down a little bit of the complexity there so that both the advanced and maybe novice exercise are on the same page, because bottom.
All right, and here we probably want to cut back to the host, right? We don't want to continue showing. So we want to select both these top layers and drag them further and further to the right, okay? So what editing is here is it's just going to be a combination of selecting, which one of these boxes we want to be showing on top so that the audience sees that, and keeping in mind, reactions, keeping in mind the 10-second rule, and switching between our razor tool or our cut tool and our selection tool. With the selection tool, we can drag clips, right? So we could drag them, any which way if you prefer to edit like that. Or you can grab your cut tool and you can cut, make a cut, and then grab your selection tool, select it, and delete it. Okay. Now there's a lot of shortcuts as you get better and better at editing, but that's a great way to start. If you are a little more advanced, go for it. Do what you know. And I am going to now set a timer, all right, for 30 seconds. And I'm just going to edit, and I want you guys to pay attention and see how things work. Ready? And go.
It isn't complicated, but it is somewhat complex, and I think it's important that we maybe break down a little bit of the complexity there so that both the advanced and maybe novice exercise are on the same page. Because bottom line is I see a lot of power exercises showing up in some basic programming or being suggested through social media, or even in these templated programs I'm see coming across.
All right, we passed 30 seconds. We're at about 45, but I was going to put the camera angle on her, but she seemed a little, not too excited about it. She's just taking everything in, so I'm going to keep it off for now. But I think he's going to ask her a question in a second. So let's just keep working for a little.
Programs I'm see coming across in people's laps that people are sharing with me. Here's my program. I'm like, why is that in there like that? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So let's start, Cece, with just defining sort of what power training is. To me. So let's start, Cece, with just defining sort of what power training is.
So power training is.
All right. One more rule I want to point out here. When switching to camera angles, when people talk, it's nice to have a layover. All right. And what I mean by that is if we're on camera wide here, camera 1, it's nice to hear someone talk for a little bit before it switches to them. So this would be the option there.
Training is.
So power training is looking at force times
Okay, so that's option number one for cutting to an individual. The other option would be to actually cut close up before she actually starts talking. So that would look something like this.
Finding sort of what power training is.
So power training is looking at.
All right, so that's another option. We could even do it a little bit before.
Just defining sort of what power training is.
So power training is
So those are the two options. What not to do, it's kind of a little disruptive to the eye, is finding the exact moment where she starts talking and then making that your edit. All right, so let's listen to that.
Sort of what power training is.
So power training is.
It's of course preference, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? But play with that and just take note of it and use it in your editing if it is of value to you. All right.
So power training is looking at force times velocity. And when we're talking about force, we're talking about maximal muscle recruitment or maximal energy production in the shortest amount of time. And velocity is adding the speed with a directional component. So let's just say, an exercise that people component.
I like keeping the camera angle on her for that entire duration of time just because she's focused, she's talking pretty fast, and what she's saying is important. So let's just listen to that.
So power training is looking at force times velocity. And when we're talking about force, we're talking about maximal muscle recruitment or maximal energy production in the shortest amount of time. And velocity is adding the speed with a directional component. So let's just say, an exercise that people are familiar with, such as a half kettlebell swing, and we're working on power production.
Okay, we're just going to cut it back to her. Here, boom. So I'm going to move Jeff over to the right.
And we're working on power production. We're working on recruiting the muscles surrounding our hips, our glutes, and bringing that kettlebell up and through. So bringing our hips hinging from a hinge position up into an.
Here she starts explaining stuff. So I'm going to just cut back over to that wide camera angle. So I used my cut tool there. I dragged them all together. So now I can select everything and just keep moving it over.
An extension position.
As fast as possible.
As fast as possible, but yet.
And also when there's dialogue back and forth that's very fast, it's great to cut out to the wide camera angle so you can kind of see everybody interacting and talking to each other, right? At the same time, they're all going back and forth.
Still controlling the direction of where that kettlebell is going.
And the momentum that's involved there and those things and those are the key components to
where that kettlebell is going.
And the momentum that's involved there and those things those are the key components to
momentum. I think is really important there.
And it's a modality that we use that doesn't involve momentum, right? And if there is one, like power training is that place where we're going to be using momentum, and the goal is to control it. It's interesting you picked the kettlebell swing. I think when I think
right, so we can just keep doing this, and of course there's no perfect way to do it, right? But you're going to want to press Control S to save your work whenever you kind of get up, stretch, take a break. And the other thing that we're doing is we're looking for clips, all right, to include in IG Story, Instagram, Vertical, etc. So what we've gone over is how to start editing and creating, this podcast. We've covered the 10-second rule. We've covered how to actually edit with your razor tool and your selection tool, and some different rules for changing between camera angles, 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as timing the edits of when people speak. So all important stuff to note. Next, in the next video, we're going to get into actually what you should be paying attention to, because there's different layers to this. We're actually going to take something that we've already heard in this short 2 minutes of podcast that we've edited and turn it into an Instagram clip and then continue editing. So I'm excited if you can try to figure out, before we even get there, which clip you would use to promote on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts.